Hi there, I'm Matt Donnelly from RotoBaller, and it's time to talk about those starts and sits in week number 2 at the tight end position. As it is every week, the tight end position was ugly, and we had injuries that we were dealing with Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. We also had those dud performances courtesy of George Kittle, Dallas Goedert, and Darren Waller. So with that being said, who can you trust in week number 2? Really, it's a tight end position, so it's going to be hard to trust anybody. But then again, fantasy football has created trust issues in so many people these days. Now that being said, let's take a look at those starts and sits for week number 2. Starting with Cole Kmet, who you are starting against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Kmet goes from a sit last week against the Green Bay Packers to a start this week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that allowed 11 receptions to the tight end position just a week ago, which translated into the second most fantasy points to the position. Fields was looking for Kmet plenty, and he was involved in this offense. How about a 19.4 target share against the Packers team? And he also posted a 90% route involvement rate. How bad was the tight end position last week? Cole Kmet's 5 catches and 44 yards, that it was considered to be a top 6 performance. At number 2, the rookie Luke Musgrave versus Atlanta. Again, 3 catches, 50 yards, enough to be considered a top fantasy option just a week ago at the tight end position. He probably would have been tight end number 1 if he hadn't tripped over his own 2 feet on that one catch that was a certain touchdown. Now the great news for Musgrave, he is facing a defense that allowed Hayden Hurst to haul in 5 passes for 41 yards and a TD. Musgrave enters this week coming off a 75% snap share and a game in which he ran a route on 85% of Jordan Love's dropbacks. Opportunity? It certainly is there. My third tight end start this week, it's Dallas Goedert versus Minnesota. Normally I would say that Dallas Goedert is a must start each and every week, but against the Patriots last week, he didn't even have a reception. Now I'm expecting a major correction in that this week, and this Eagles offense will be looking to get everything back together. Basically, they look like a team that hadn't played together since last year's Super Bowl. That's how bad they actually look. Last season, the Vikings allowed nearly 12 fantasy points per game to tight ends, so expect the Eagles to take full advantage of these Vikings linebackers on Thursday Night Football. That all leads us to our sits this week, starting with Hayden Hurst versus New Orleans. Now from the fantasy penthouse to the fantasy outhouse, Hurst goes from having one of the best fantasy weeks for tight ends to facing one of the worst possible matchups a tight end can face in a defense that has done a great job in shutting down the position over the last couple seasons. Just look at that 0 for 0 for 0 stat line that Chigakonkwo posted last week. I believe Tennessee only targeted their tight ends maybe twice the entire contest, which is not great news for those that went out and picked up Hurst on the waivers this week. Number 2 tight end that you're sitting, Zach Ertz versus the New York Giants. I was as surprised as any to see double-digit targets for Zach Ertz in his return from injury, but I'd be even more surprised if he somehow was able to duplicate that performance this week against a Giants team that held Jake Ferguson to just 2 catches and 11 yards. Now I know that game in New York got out of hand really quick, and perhaps Ferguson could have produced if the game was a little bit closer, but it wasn't. Even early on, the Giants, they did a good job of defending Ferguson. If you're going out there and you're putting Zach Ertz in your line, that feels like you're just chasing the points, and I'd rather just avoid that altogether. My third sit of the week, it is Pat Freiermuth of the Steelers versus the Cleveland Browns, and this is all about the Cleveland Browns here. Cleveland limited Joe Burrow to 14 of 31 passing for just 82 yards last week. If they can do that to Joe Burrow, what do you think they have in store for Kenny Pickett and Pat Freiermuth this week? If you are catching passes for the Steelers, it is a hard fade for me. That's Deontay Johnson, who's got that hamstring injury. George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, it doesn't matter. Calvin Austin, Allen Robinson, it doesn't matter right now. Jamar Chase was the leading receiver against this Browns defense, and all he was able to do was catch 5 passes for 39 yards. Looking at the tight end position, Irv Smith was second with 3 catches and 17 yards. That's a hard no for me. The week 2 tight ends that you are starting, it's Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, TJ Hawkinson, and Mark Andrews if healthy. You start them each and every week, mostly because you can't afford not to. You're starting Cole Kmet versus the Buccaneers. He could be the top target of Justin Fields in this one if week 1 is any indication. You're also starting Luke Musgrave. Snaps and route participation have been there, and now he has a juicy matchup here in week number 2. You're starting Dallas Goedert versus the Minnesota Vikings. Eagles' first team, they got their preseason out of the way. and they look for maybe a little bit of an overcorrection here for Goddard in week number 2. Those are the tight ends you're starting. These are tight ends you're going to sit. Hayden Hurst, he may be coming off one of the best weeks last week, but he faces one of the toughest matchups this week. Zach Ertz, he may have surprised with those 10 targets in week 1. It'd be even more surprising if he was able to do it again. And you're also sitting Pat Freiermuth, another tough matchup against a Browns defense coming into Chicago after making Joe Burrow look a fool. Be sure to like and subscribe to the RotoBaller YouTube channel for plenty more great fantasy football analysis, and we'll see you next time.